Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Megan, and today I'm going to be doing another book review. I am going to be reviewing the next book that I read this year. It's called Sisters of Fortune, and it is a historical novel set on the Titanic. So let's get started. So this book follows the Fortune family. So at the beginning of the novel, the Fortune family, they're on a grand tour, and they're at the last stop. They're in Cairo, Egypt right now. And in the prologue of the book, one of the daughters, Alice, she's sitting outside with a gentleman. They're having tea or coffee. And this other man walks by who's kind of like a psychic. So he visits Alice and this other man who actually ends up going to be on the Titanic. And he kind of like looks at her palm and he says, "You are in danger every time you travel on the sea. You will lose everything, but you will be saved, and you will not lose your life." This is the opening of the book, and you're just like, oh no, they don't know what's in store for them, because this family is a real family. And when I first read the intro part, I thought to myself, I wonder if that is a true story, if Alice really experienced this. So when I actually finished the book, I did some research, and yeah, that part was actually a true story. Fortune family, they're from Canada, they're from Winnipeg, and there's the father and the mother, and then they have 6 children. Their 2 oldest children, Robert, and I don't know the eldest daughter's name, but the son and the daughter, the 2 oldest, they're already married. And so they have 3 daughters and a son that go on the trip. So Flora, who's 27, or no, she's 28, I think. Yeah, Flora's 28, Alice is 24, Mabel's 23, and then Charlie, this youngest son, he is 19 years old. So Flora is engaged, Alice is also engaged, and then Mabel has a boyfriend at home. So they're 4 months in. So they're in the end of the stretch of their grand tour. So 4 months ago, their dad had mentioned hey, we should go on this grand tour. And so the 3 younger daughters and the son, they all decide to go. So they're in Egypt, and they're going to be heading over to the Titanic. And so throughout the entire book, because the Titanic has always been said that, oh my gosh, it's never going to sink, or it's flawless. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, this is the first voyage that it's going on. The fact that you think it's perfect, and there are accidents that happen, and nothing is perfect. This inkling of icebergs, the weather, all of these things come into play. And it's just really interesting reading this book because it sets place on the Titanic. So it's, 3 or 4 days on the boat. It's really interesting to see the life. I don't know what it's like to be on a ship for 3 or 4 days, but it's so interesting to see how everyone interacts. There's a lot of famous athletes, there's famous business people, there's all people across Europe. And so it really brought me back to that time. I had to skim through when the sinking was happening, because it's just, you already know it's going to happen. You already know it's going to happen. And you get so attached to the characters in the book, the sisters and the father and the son, and just knowing how women were protected back then, and the men, the sacrifice of protectors, the innate qualities that they have. Do you know that the men are probably not going to make it, because saving the women are the number one priority. But it was also really cool to learn about different parts of the ship. So Charlie, who's the youngest child, he's 19. He's so enthralled in ships. And so it was really kind of cool to see a glimpse of how the workers are, how they're always up at night, what precautions are taken. And you learn, obviously, probably you learned in history class too, is that they didn't have enough emergency kits or boats or anything to fulfill the 2,200 people or however many was on board, because only 700 people survived. And so in my head, I'm like, well, is it even safe to go aboard somewhere? Like, if the worst possible case scenario happens, why don't you have 100% of the protection, or at least 90% of the protection? And so you learn that they don't have enough floaties, they don't even have enough boats to get people to escape. And so that just kind of blows my mind. Or like, I don't know much about ships or boats, but is that normal to only have a small portion amount based on the number of people that are on the ship? It's just still sad to see, knowing that you should be prepared for those scenarios. And maybe they had too many people on the ship. I don't know. But I would think in my mind that you would at least have more than 50% of emergency on a ship or a boat in case something does happen, to protect the people, because that is your job, is to protect the people that are on board. It's just like a really good book for getting a glimpse of what it's like to be on a voyage, on a ship, on a boat. Like I said, I've never been on one before, so it was really cool to kind of see the everyday life, especially back in the early 1900s. Like, everything just seems so like romantic, and how the women and the men speak to each other, and like courting, goals in life and things like that. And I just thought it was like really cool, because the girls, it does kind of focus on the girls so much, because this trip of like 4 months of being out at sea, or experiencing the world, there is a change. Those experiences change and move you. And that is kind of a thing. Like, Flora is engaged back at home, but she meets this guy who's like a famous tennis player, and everyone knows that they're like infatuated with each other. And her family at home doesn't really like her fiance. She's only marrying him to please her parents. And so she kind of comes to the realization of kind of putting her foot down, and she's 28 years old. Like, she shouldn't be doing certain things to please her parents. Like, she is her own person. And so all three of the girls kind of come to a consensus of where they want to be in their life at the end of this trip. So Flora deals with that. Alice is someone who just like wants to travel. She just wants to go see things before she like settles down and has a family. And she is like engaged to a guy, and there's this other guy that's there. He's just like a very flirtatious guy, and she misses her fiance so much. And I really like her character. Her character is just a sweet, down-to-earth girl. She just wants to experience as much of the world as she can, before starting a family. And she's kind of worried about like what her fiance will say, because she wants to go do all this stuff. And so when she does survive, the women do survive, and so she does go back home, and she tells him all her fears. And I just love her fiance. He's like, I don't want you to ever be scared to like not talk to me and not tell me how you feel. And she's like, this is what I really want to do. He's like, okay. He's like, let's go do it. And she's like, really? And he's like, yeah. Because she gets like boat sick and sometimes like travel sickness. And so she's just like, she's like, I wasn't sure if you were still going to marry me. He's like, I love you. He's like, I was worried that maybe like you weren't going to want to marry me after this trip, if you were going to change or do any of this other stuff. So they were like a really cute couple. So they got married like 2 months after. So they got married in June. And so it was just kind of like cute couple situation. And then Mabel really wants to go to university, and her dad is not okay with that, because that's not what women do at the time. But she met some women on board that were that end up going into like medicine and helping like underprivileged women. I'm worried because she kind of gets in an argument with her dad on the boat, and it's like towards the end of before it sinks. But I think they ended up like kind of like hashing it out. And so I don't know if she ended up ever going to university. I didn't look into her after that. It was just kind of interesting to see the three girls and how much the trip has changed them, and really had them like rethink their lives, which I think is really relatable for people in their 20s and 30s today, especially since, you know, like 2020. Everyone's just kind of reevaluating where they are in life and what they really want, how to get there, what support they have. So that was just really cool and reassuring reading that even though 3 women were in the mid to late 20s, they didn't have their life figured out yet. And they were still, you know, dreamers, especially, you know, like 100 years ago when people got married much younger and maybe already had kids by their late 20s. It was just really refreshing to kind of see, you know, them still determined and still going for it at their age. And I think that's really inspiring. And then Charlie. So sad about Charlie. He was 19, and I just don't think that it was set up good for him as a young man. I would just love to see his life beyond 19, because he was just such a joyful character, someone, just a wondering little boy that just wanted to know everything. And he, as a lot of men on board, sacrificed their life to protect all the women. But a lot of them are going home to no one or just don't have that financial support. So that's kind of the hardest. There was this one guy, Mr. Slopper is his name. He ended up being on one of the first boats that went off, and he was very cheeky and decided to grab clothes and go in disguise as a woman so that he could get on board, because they were boarding all the women first and the children before the men. And so they just ran out of boats and ran out of time. So a lot of men got left on the boat to fight for themselves. And because they hit an iceberg, which if you look at the map on Google, it's actually not that far from where they needed to land. It was their ship from the New England area, or I think it was out of Boston, and a ship came to rescue them. It took them, I think, 3 hours to get there, but obviously they were too late. But they saw the other boats in the ocean, and so the boats, everyone went onto that ship, and then they went back to New England area, and that's kind of how they got everyone off the boat. Because of how cold it was in April, a lot of people got frostbite when they got into the water. So they really couldn't survive. I think there were, I don't know how many men that were like armed together, but a lot of them just got like super numb and just end up dying from like hypothermia. If you're into historical fiction or the historical genre, I would say definitely check this out. You will not be disappointed. There's a little bit, like there's just some goofy characters, and it just gives you a really good glimpse of what life is like on a ship. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.